Welcome to History Should Not Be a Mystery. My name is Anita Wills, and I'm a genealogist. I'm an author. I've written several books, mostly about my ancestors. I'm Afro-Indigenous, a member of the Monacan Indian Nation in Virginia. I was born and raised in Pennsylvania, currently living on the West Coast. And my history comes from being passed down orally through my maternal lines. In other words, it was passed down through my mother, through her mother, through her mother, through her grandmother, and on and on and on. So we have a very rich history. And many of us, people of color, African Americans, Native Americans, have a very rich history. Here in America, the rich history seems to be only given to Europeans, at least in popular media. But we have, as people of African descent, as people of Native descent, indigenous to these um, American shores. And when I'm speaking of America, I mean from the tip of America down by the Panama Canal, Brazil, all the way up to the Aleutians. That is America. America is a continent. Africa is a continent. These are land masses that, for one reason or another, the colonial settlers decided to come here and take what they found, ignoring the people that they found. The people became dispensable because they were living in a pristine environment that had gold and oil reserves, had copper, had ore, everything underneath their feet. And the natives knew it, or the indigenous people, but they were not willing to exploit the land to bring those resources up because, in their belief, which is a popular belief even to this day, when you disturb the earth, you don't just bring up one thing, you bring up stuff that was buried. And when things are buried, there's a reason, and they're not meant to be brought up. And the Africans have similar beliefs. They don't monetize what is under their feet. They don't monetize, or they did not, before they were colonized, monetize the gold and the oil and the um, copper and whatever is under their feet, the diamonds and rubies, everything that these people who came and colonized indigenous lands saw was there. The indigenous people knew that stuff was there, and they did not want to monetize it. In other words, take it up out of the ground, take it from the people who actually were on the land by any means necessary, including killing the people, because the resources could bring these people um, wealth and power and give them something that Europe did not offer them, because Europe was basically a barren land. They didn't have that. Um, Not to say that there wasn't beauty in Europe. I'm sure there was water and whatever else they needed to survive, but they wanted more. And they didn't want to share it with the people who they found on the lands, the indigenous people of the Americas, the indigenous people of Africa, the indigenous people of Asia, the indigenous people of the Middle East. That's why it's no surprise what is going on, the war against the Palestinians, because the Palestinians are sitting on some wealth that the colonial settlers view as something that should belong to them. They can make money. They can be powerful. And all of their stealing and killing still has not made them secure. They are the most insecure human beings on the face of the earth. And it is by their own doing. And I'm here today, and I want to bring up one of my ancestors that really sticks out to me and really tells the story of who the settlers are. And they were in Virginia, and they were the Nanzattico Indians. They were the Rappahannock. There is a Rappahannock tribe today, but that's not the original Rappahannocks. The original Rappahannocks were the Nanzattico Indians. They were one of the oldest tribes in Virginia, and they were in King George County on one side of the Rappahannock River, and then they were in Caroline County on the other side of the Rappahannock River. And the settlers came and continued to encroach on their land, and they were, they were upset, just like these Europeans here. They got their castle doctrines and all that, so nobody will step on their land. But they were going, and they have what they call the squatters' rights or something like that. But they were going on the land, and the Rappahannocks, and then they were disrespecting them on the land because they had certain rituals, they had certain ways that they treated and regarded the land, and these European settlers had no such respect for the land. And it turned out that this family that was living, that had encroached on the land, got killed. Somebody slaughtered them. And to this day, there is no proof that it was the Nanzattico. But because it was, it was what you would say expedient to blame the Indians, the natives, on their own land for, when they found those bodies, they accused them. This is the colonial settlers who had been welcomed to the shores of Virginia by these same natives. These natives helped them to survive the winters, fed them, kept them warm. And what did they do? They encroached on their land. And then when these people wound up deceased, they blamed the native people. And in order to save the rest of the tribe, 4 of the men from the Nanzattico turned themselves in and were immediately hanged. And that was not enough. They went after the rest of the tribal members and took them to Richmond, put them in a cell, and made a decision to separate the children from their parents. And all of the adult members of the Nanzattico Indian tribe were sold as slaves to Antigua, put in boats, and sent to Antigua. While and they were also by law. And let me explain that the Episcopalian Church and the Anglican churches were the ones that were making the laws then. That was 1704. We had not even had the Revolutionary War. So the England, they had people they sent over here from the churches that made the laws. And so they passed the law that these Nanzattico could not come back to the colonies. Can you imagine how arrogant you have to be to tell somebody they can't come back to their ancestral homeland when you're a visitor? Okay. And so, they passed the law. They put them on the ships. They were never heard from again. We don't know today whether they ever even arrived there. The children, including my direct ancestor, Indian Charles, were indentured out for 25 years to the planters that got the land. So the planters, who were actually slave owners, they got the land, and the children, I believe it was over 14. If they were under 14 years old, then they didn't have to be. They weren't sent as slaves if you were under. I think it was under 14. So my ancestor, Indian Charles, who was a child back then, separated from his parents and indentured out to the Lewises, and on the same land that his ancestors had lived on, where the villages were for thousands of years. Okay, and Indian Charles um, wound up marrying this woman named Josephine. She was a mulatto woman herself, and according to my DNA, this Josephine is related to the Washingtons, so she's part white, part European, because my DNA, which runs through her, is goes back to Wales, or to what was Wales. The British went over there and colonized Wales too, took over their land. That's what they do. I mean, when I say British, I mean the Anglos and the Normans. So my ancestors, Charles, Indian Charles and Josephine, had Charles Lewis, who is my direct ancestor. And Charles Lewis and his brother Ambrose were indentured out, and they were in Fredericksburg. They were indentured to this man who owned a galley. It's called the Page Galley. So they were on the Page Galley. Anyway, sentenced to the Page Galley. But Indian Charles was under these laws, okay? He nor any of the native children that remained here were Indian, were considered Indian. Or they could not use their tribal name, which was Nanzattico, nor could they say they were Indian. They were hence and forever considered mulatto. They could also be colored. They could be Negroes or black, according to what that census taker saw them as. So the census taker, who was usually a white male, he decided which one of those categories. So in Fredericksburg, Virginia, they have a category called FPC, Free Persons of Color. And so Charles and Ambrose, his brother Ambrose, in Fredericksburg, they were under that category of free persons of color. And by law, they could not claim to be indigenous, Indian, or native, nor could they claim to be Nanzattico, which was the tribe. This is by law. Makes no sense to me, but I guess it made perfect sense to the colonizer. I mean, this is called paper genocide. And I found that quite frequently, not only in Virginia, I found in Maryland, Delaware, and all of the colonies. Let me put it like that, okay? Because I'm from Pennsylvania, and they did the same thing in Pennsylvania. And when I was born, and my siblings were born, we were listed as colored. And we went to a colored school in rural Pennsylvania, a colored school. And this is their way of removing the native people from their lands with the swipe of a pen. But they were also enslaving native people. So let's go back to when Columbus landed. He landed in Hispaniola in Cuba, in what is Cuba today. And he enslaved the Arawak, had them, mining gold, the children, the adults. But they also removed a lot of the Arawaks and sent them as slaves to Africa, West Africa. Y'all didn't know that, did you? So this is what we live under. We live under lies and distortions. So now they have CRT where we're not supposed to even speak of our history in some of these states in the United States. We're not they call it the CRT, which is a CRT is critical race theory, and that's taught in legal schools. It's not even taught in elementary schools or high schools or anything like that. But they want to make sure that their children don't learn the true history. That America was built on land stolen from native peoples and worked by African slaves who were mostly children. They had to be young and healthy. Think about that, because they don't want us talking about it. If it was of no consequence, why don't they even want us talking about it? Why don't they want us teaching about it? Okay? And so Charles and Ambrose Lewis, my direct ancestors, were in the Revolutionary War out of Fredericksburg, Virginia. Charles Lewis, Ambrose Lewis. I was able to join the Daughters of the American Revolution through my connection to Charles Lewis. And the history and the story of my ancestors that were in Virginia, because Charles and Ambrose weren't the only natives, are not my only native ancestors. I have the Wycomico from Lancaster County, Virginia. Raleigh Penn. He was in the Revolutionary War too, with his brothers and his nephews, Billy, Bob, Jim, and Robert. They were in the Revolutionary War at the Siege of Yorktown. And Raleigh Penn's wife, Sarah Red Cross Evans Penn, her brothers were in the Revolutionary War. So there's a lot of connections through my ancestors in Virginia who were in the Revolutionary War, who probably thought they were fighting to get rid of the people who had come, abused them, and enslaved them, and then wound up fighting the Revolutionary War and still being stuck with slaveholders and land grabbers. And during the Revolutionary War, my ancestors owned land and businesses. Prior to the Revolutionary War, they owned lands and businesses. And all of that, which would have been generational wealth, was taken from them. But because they had laws that allowed white settlers to come in and squat on the land owned by my ancestors and other free persons of color in Virginia, they took all of their rights. And we need to know this history. We need to understand this history. We need to share this history because it's still going on today. We continue to see where they're bringing immigrants in and blame the immigrants and not look at the government that's doing this, the ones that are silent. are the ones who are complicit because they're bringing in over from South America, free and cheap labor. Let's not blame the South Americans, the people who are fleeing, because they're actually fleeing from the same thing they're running to, because America or the United States is destabilizing these countries. And then there are poor people who want to run from the countries and come to America or the United States. You're coming to the place that caused you to suffer in the first place because the history is not being taught. People are poor and they don't have the time or energy to go to school. They don't have the money or the resources. And these are heavily Catholic countries. The Roman Catholic Church, the same Catholic Church that funded Columbus' voyage to Hispaniola, is the church that's in South America, that controls South America, that is causing or allowing the suffering of these people who are running to America looking for freedom or the American dream. And the sad part of it is you running from the frying pan into the fire. And I don't blame them for 1 second. They are collateral damage. Look at what's going on in the Middle East, what the Zionists are doing to the Palestinian people, killing off their future, killing off the children, killing off the women who bear the children. And you think that coming here to America, that there is some kind of American dream, it's really sad. It's really sad because the more that folks buy into that, the more, you're feeding the beast. Sorry, but that's what's going on. But my ancestors, my Native American ancestors from Virginia, they were fighting the good fight. They were in the Revolutionary War, getting rid of the British and not knowing that that the people that they were helping, the side they were on, the patriots, were worse than the people they were kicking out. They should have, while they had those rifles, got rid of all of them. Because George Washington, okay, that's my cousin. Like I said, the Lewises, Indian Charles Lewis, my ancestor, married Josephine, and through her DNA, we find out we're related to the Warners and the Lewises and all them folks back then. We're, like when I joined the DAR, they said, "Oh, you're one of Washington's mulattoes," and I guess they knew. And so I'm not bragging. There's no bragging rights there. The Washingtons had my ancestors, which are the Boldens. They were their mulatto indentured servants for like 4 generations. And Mary Bolden, her father was William Monroe Jr. So that's President Monroe's brother, President Monroe's uncle. Let me get it right now. Okay. James Monroe's uncle, William Monroe Jr. He went into a marriage with Mary Monroe, who was an indentured servant to a mulatto indentured servant to his father. And Mary's mother, Lydia Hilliard, was a white woman. The father was a Negro or an Indian. We don't know because they were calling Indians Negroes back then. And so they entered into a marriage around 1720. And then she had a baby. And that child was illegitimate and she was taken to court for having a bastard child. Now, isn't this a trip? These people that are over here, that came here, was raping Native women, raping African women, and creating a whole new race. Not a race, okay, mixed race. Creating mulattoes and Creoles and whatever. Had the nerve to charge the mother with bastardy after they um, put him in a situation where they would be impregnated. And this is America. This is the America that we live in. This is it was Turtle Island for thousands and thousands of years before the Europeans came. And we know our history. Europeans don't seem to know their history because they only trace their history back to when Columbus founded Hispaniola. You know, they don't talk about, the average American does not talk about what their history was in Europe. They talk about what Europe's history was. They don't talk about what their families did in Europe and why their families were forced to flee Europe and come to the colony here in America. But doesn't the Statue of Liberty say, "Bring me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to be free"? So is that your history? But you don't want us talking about our history because you only claim history as far back as when Columbus so-called discovered America, a land where my ancestors had lived for thousands and thousands of years, you know? So this is why it is so important for us to continue to share the history. And Charles and Ambrose lived a good life and they were helping people. Charles purchased slaves and freed them. Charles purchased a slave and his brother Ambrose married her. Her name was Fanny Williams. He was purchasing and freeing slaves. And he was purchasing them and they were living on his estate. He had an estate. And I appreciate it because he was doing better or more than he was taught to do. They were trying to brainwash him into not doing that kind of stuff. And he actually, we don't know what his cause of death was, but he didn't live long into the 1800s. I think he was deceased by 1802 after the Revolutionary War. And also the same thing with, Ambrose lived to be pretty old because Ambrose is the one that was the historian for the Lewis family. And he went to D.C. Now here's a man, and Ambrose was a drayer, what they call a drayman. What he would do, he had a wagon, he would go down to the ships in Fredericksburg and get materials and get goods and ship them and take and bring them back and sell them or deliver them. That was his living. And this was a man who had been shot and bayoneted clean through during the Revolutionary War at the Battle of Camden. He's someone who should have got a medal for his um, contribution to the Revolutionary War. And he was taken prisoner, Ambrose Lewis, and kept on the British ship until after the end of the war, when my other ancestor, Raleigh Penn, who was at the siege of Yorktown with his brother Robert and his nephews. They were the ones with George Washington um, who ended the war. That was the siege of Wartown. The siege of Yorktown was the last and winning battle of the American Revolutionary War. And so this is our history, and there's so much more. There's so much rich history, and we want to, and I tell it in honor of the Nanzattico Indian nation, who are some of the bravest human beings, and I'm so proud to be connected to them. And I pray that at some point we find out if they made it to Antigua safely. And if if they remain there, they may have come back. We don't know. Or their descendants may have come back. And this is something we're going to continue to pursue. And I'm going to continue to talk to you guys and meet with you all. And thank you for tuning in. Thank you for hearing us and for sharing and for believing in truth and freedom and justice.